Hello world, my name is Andy Silvers and today we're going to talk about the Sony Xperia Fan Club. Alright, welcome back to the channel. I know I've been away for a little while, but I have been working on publishing and advertising my brand new novel. My new novel is called Hoop Drama. It is a contemporary drama, takes place in roughly 2018. It's a really awesome book. I've had great feedback from people who've read it this far. As you can tell, I'm not just a YouTuber. I'm a filmmaker, author, tech enthusiast. I pretty much just do a little bit of everything. So if you want to support this channel directly, please consider going to the link in the description and picking up my new novel, Hoop Drama. It makes an amazing Christmas gift. Alright, so today we're going to talk a little bit about the Sony Xperia. The Sony Xperia smartphone from the Sony product line has been my daily driver phone for the past, I'd say, 3 years or so. I have been purchasing their phones ever since I found out about the Sony Xperia 1.4, and I've really enjoyed their products ever since. The Sony Xperia phones are really unique in the way that they're designed and branded, yet they don't tend to do very well in terms of overall market saturation and sales. And I want to talk a little bit about why I like them and talk a little bit about why they're as unpopular with the sort of general public as they clearly are. So I have owned many phones over the past several years, from iPhone to Android. I've tried almost everything, except for foldables. I'm not a really big fan of foldables, but I've tried pretty much everything else. My current daily driver is the Sony Xperia 5.4. And that's the first thing I want to get to real quick is the naming. Unfortunately, Sony's naming is kind of absurd. It's not the most difficult, but it is a bit confusing. Because Sony's primary flagship phone is called the One. So you'd think when they released a second version of it, right, they'd call it the Two, like the iPhone, right? iPhone 1, 2, 3, and so on. But no, they did not do that. The new Sony flagship phone as of the time of this recording is the Sony 1.6. So not a great name. It should just be called the Sony 6 probably, or maybe they could call it something else with the number 6 in it. You have the 1 series, which is going to represent their flagship series. That's going to be what this phone is here. You have the 5 series, which is like the mid-tier, which is what I'm daily driving right here. And then you have the 10 series, that is going to be the lower end series, which is going to be in the like $450 to $550 price range, roughly. So Sony covers the gamut in terms of smartphone product line. They don't have a ton of options like Samsung does. Samsung has like 10 active phones in each calendar year. It's kind of wild. But they do have a great lineup. So why don't more people buy these phones? What's the deal? This is where I disagree with a bit of the online consensus, because bigger channels have covered the Sony Xperia phones, and they have said that the problem with the Sony Xperia phones is that they're too niche, right? The feature set is too niche. Sony, and there is some truth to this, what Sony typically tends to do with their phones, because Sony is a movie studio with Sony Pictures and a camera manufacturer with things like the FX9 and the Venice, they have their foothold very clearly in Hollywood. They even have a visual effects studio as well, Sony Pictures Imageworks. So they're in Hollywood, they're embedded there. And so their phones, on average, I have 2 of them here, tend to be directed towards videographers, filmmakers, and the like. And I think this is a good thing as a filmmaker because I like the features that they have. The main thing that really gives them that filmmaker quality is the Cinema Pro app that gives you the ability to shoot 10-bit log footage, or at least fairly flat footage for color correction later. You can do so in 1440p and 4K. There's a lot of features in terms of controlling the focus and the aperture, although not really because the aperture is fixed on these because they're smartphones. But you can change a lot of the specs and such manually. And the idea is, according to the online sort of community is that casuals don't like that. They don't want to have to bother with the ISO or the aperture or the color profile or any of that stuff. But I think there's truth to that, but I don't think that's actually the case because if you look at the competition, right, who's the competition? Well, if you look at a flagship phone, the competition is going to be the Google Pixel, like the 9 at this point in time, the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro, and so on, and of course the Samsung Galaxy, things like the S24, S24 Ultra, etc. Right? That's the competition. And what do these manufacturers focus on in their marketing? The cameras, right? It's all about the cameras. And you know what's hilarious is that Sony has incorporated a little button right here on the side of the phone, and I will show you a quick live demonstration. So watch this. I have my finger on this button, and watch what happens here. Look at that. I opened the camera app by holding down the button, and then as soon as it's open, boom, I can take a picture. So guess who just added that to their phone? Apple. Apple, after many, many, many years, finally felt it would be a good idea to put a camera button in roughly the same spot as Sony does, but Sony's been doing this for years. I don't know exactly how far back Sony started doing this, but I do know that this, the Sony Xperia 1 III, that was my first foray into Sony as a daily driver, has that button, just like this one, the 5.4 does, and like the new ones, the 1.6 and the 5.5 and the 10.6. It's confusing names. If I get it wrong, that's Sony's fault. But anyway, Apple finally did it. Yes, their button arguably has more features, but if you look at a lot of the reviews that have come out about the iPhone 16 Pro and such, a lot of people are not using this button with the gestures so much as they're just pushing it to take a picture. And it is convenient. It's really convenient to hold the phone like this with your finger in a natural resting position and take a picture. It's a bit more difficult for selfies, of course, but it can be done. And Sony's been doing this for years. And it makes you wonder why Sony isn't more popular. So I don't think it's necessarily because of the Pro features, because every manufacturer does the same thing. Have you seen Apple's ads where they take the newest iPhone, whatever it is, and shoot some sort of professional project on it? Like I know once it was a Lady Gaga music video, and then it's been like a short film from like critically acclaimed director or like a video from a critically acclaimed DP. Right? That's something Apple has been doing with the iPhone to market it. Even though I don't think most videographers are going to use their iPhone for a music video or a professional shoot unless they feel like they have to. So it can't really be that. That doesn't add up. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. If you go to a Verizon store, if you go to a T-Mobile store, if you go to an AT&T store, you just don't see Sony phones on the shelves. Even if you just look at probability, the law of probability, if this was sitting on a shelf for a user to come up and mess with, there would be a chance that they would use it. And a few years ago, I actually did see an Xperia at a Verizon store, physically there. And Sony was one of the first companies, if not the first, major phone carrier to include 4K screens. Now, is that really necessary? No. And which is why Sony has actually undone that. This is the flagship 1 Mark III. And now we're finally onto the 1 Mark VI. And guess what? That's their flagship. It doesn't have a 4K screen. It has a 1440p screen, essentially, which is more than enough for pretty much everyone. But the point that I'm making is that if Sony phones were on the shelves in these stores, yeah, I think they would sell more just from law of probability. But why do I like them? Well, I like the professional camera features as an actual award-winning filmmaker and YouTuber, but I like them for other reasons as well. For example, headphone jack. Sony has not yet abandoned the physical headphone jack, and it's in the preferred position at the top, which I think is more relevant. So if you hold the phone like this on a table, you're not banging the headphones or the cable into the table and such. They also have a SD card slot expansion on all models. As far as I'm aware, even the lowest end models have this SD card expansion. And the SIM card is removable. The latest iPhones have an eSIM. And by the way, the Sony support eSIM as well, but they also have the physical SIM card, which I think is crucial to their success and crucial to my enjoyment of them. Because if I want to switch from T-Mobile to AT&T or Verizon Wireless or whatever, I want to be able to have a physical SIM card to pull out. And if I want to cut myself off from the world, I want to be able to just take out the SIM card and know that I'm not going to be dealing with, spam texts and such. It's just really nice. Sony has a lot going for them there. They also support wireless charging, which is pretty popular these days, but it is nice that they have it. They have a USB-C port, which up until recently Apple could not be guaranteed to have. Obviously, it took till the 15 before they implemented it widely, which is convenient. This means you can use a laptop charger with your Sony phone, and in fact, I do this all the time. So it's great. They have a fingerprint reader, and yes, a lot of the flagships do too from Samsung, but it's in the side power button, which is one of the most convenient places for it. So I really appreciate that. And the biggest thing for me is, let's see here, let me unlock the phone. So the biggest thing for me is the fact that there's no notch or whatever. There's no notch or hole punch anywhere, including on the latest models, because these two are not the latest ones. But because Sony has not changed the design very much, this looks like the latest one. You couldn't really tell the difference, except for maybe that there's like the striped vertical pattern on the rails, if you will. But besides that, they look almost the same. And so the fact that there's no hole punch is really convenient. Now you could say, well, but that means there's a small notch on the top and the bottom. And yeah, there is. But a notch, in my opinion, is much more useful and practical than a giant punch being taken out of your display. If you're watching YouTube videos in full screen or movies in full screen, it's really irritating to have just this random hole. And Apple has made it even worse. They don't just have a hole, they have a dynamic island. And the dynamic island, in my opinion, is beyond stupid. It's a compromise solution that they have made to remove the notch, but they made it worse. Because now there's even more wasted space, essentially, because you have a gap of pixels between the dynamic island and the top of the display that's basically useless. It's just... And in order to use the dynamic island, you have to reach all the way up to the top and kind of hold on it and try to do it. I'm not saying it can't be done, but the point I'm making is that Apple is compromising, is the point. Sony, despite not having changed their designs hardly in several generations, isn't really compromising. Because they make a phone that has the latest features. It has touch to pay. I'm able to actually take book payments on my Sony phones by literally just tapping the person's credit card to the back of the phone. It's extremely easy to do, no hassle. I really like the speakers. The front-facing speakers are fairly big and fairly powerful because there's room for them. They're not having to be crammed into a teeny tiny microscopic space. There's just a lot to like about the Sony phones, even if you're not a tech enthusiast, which is why it makes you wonder why they're not super popular. And the first reason I mentioned is because they're not in stores. Sony just doesn't put the effort into putting them in stores, at least not smaller stores. There's a chance that if you're in like New York City, that's a big enough community that Sony might feel comfortable putting it in a Verizon store because there's just so many customers. But in general, they're not going to be there. And I think that that's a problem. But the other problem is availability. See, here's the thing. If you go and you look for the latest Sony phone, the flagship, you're ready to buy it, you're going to have difficulty doing that in the States. Because in the States, you really can only go up to the Sony 1.5. But that's not the latest one. Sony now has the 1.6. But the 1.6 is much easier to get in foreign markets, like in Europe, for example. So if you want one, you're going to have to either go to eBay and have it shipped to you from like China or Britain or something, or you're going to have to go to Sony EU's website and pay the exchange from, the currency there to US dollars in order to get it. You can do it, but it's a challenge. And it's really weird. And of course, the Sony 10, which is the name of their lowest end phone, the 10 is just not available at all. Because at least with the 1, you can get the 1.5 in America pretty easily. Whereas with the 10, you just can't. It's just not in America. That doesn't mean it's impossible to get. And let me know in the comments if you want me to get one and do a review of it. But just be aware that's the lowest end in the lineup. But I kind of really like the way it looks, and so I would be happy to do a review. But let me know if you actually want a review. I managed to get both of these phones unlocked. That was crucial because I want to be able to use whatever carrier I want. And unfortunately, some of these smaller carriers are not compatible. I really wanted to use Verizon Visible, but I was unable to do so with either of these. But Mint Mobile would work. And it's ironic because Mint Mobile is, as far as I'm aware, owned by T-Mobile, but yet T-Mobile did not support this phone. So, I don't know. But the point is that there are challenges to getting these phones and meaningfully testing them and using them, which I think is the actual reason why they're not that popular in the States. They have a lot of the same processors as those phones, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, 2, and 3, for example. They have a great camera selection. One thing that's unique about the new Sony 1, 5, and 6 is that the zoom lens is not a normal zoom lens. It actually optically zooms in and out. So what that means is that the lens elements are moving around to adjust the field of view. This is not like it is on an iPhone with a digital zoom where you pinch and you zoom in and it's just cropping basically. The latest Sony flagship, the 1.6 for instance, has optical zoom. So Sony is doing technologically unique stuff. No, they don't have a folding phone, but they're doing technologically challenging stuff, but people just still seem to not be interested. Their market share is shockingly low. In fact, I've only met one other person who has a Sony Xperia phone. And even when I went to Best Buy, the Sony rep who was there to talk about the Sony TVs and such, he didn't even have a Sony phone. These phones tend to be either like a 21:9 or maybe like a 20:9 aspect ratio. So they're very tall. I actually daily drove the Google Pixel 9 literally for one day. And I really liked a lot about it, but I could tell after just a day it wasn't for me. Because it was too wide, which made it a bit difficult to hold. And this wasn't the big model, this was the regular one. It didn't have a SIM card slot or an SD card slot. I mean, it may have a SIM, but it didn't have a micro SD slot. It didn't have a headphone jack, and it just... Oh, and the colors. So in the Sony phone, when you go into the profile, you can change the colors with fine-tuned control. You can change the white balance. And yes, I know that the Google Pixels have night light, which a lot of laptops do too, where you can change it. But the problem was, with the Google Pixel, when I turned on the night light feature, it was too yellow. It was too yellow because the night light feature on the Google Pixel was not there for you to just have the phone to control the color. That might be the way to say it. It's not there for you to control the color temperature. It's there explicitly for you to make everything look yellow for your eye strain, essentially. And you can control the refresh rate. This phone and the newest Sony phones go up to 120 Hertz, just like all the other flagships. They're really not that different than the flagships. Well, the new 1 Mark 6 is a flagship phone, just like the other flagships. It's like $1,000 to $1,200, depending on the storage. And I don't really need to spend that much money on a smartphone, especially if I'm going to upgrade it in a year or two. It's just unnecessary. And this caught my attention with this really pretty matte, sort of like pearly white color. It just looks absolutely amazing in my opinion. And this is the 5.4, so it's not the latest 5.5, but that meant it was only about $500, but it has all the features of all the other Sony phones, minus the slightly bigger display and the zooming camera lens feature. Alright, thank you for checking out this video. Please like the video and subscribe if you want to see more content. And of course, go to check out the description. Check out my brand new novel, Hoop Drama. It's an amazing book. It's a really important story. It's really exciting, a lot of fun. And if that's not for you, I have 3 other books you can consider this holiday season. 2 for kids, 2 for teens and adults. Check it out in the description to support me directly. And I'll see you in the next video.